hello, good morning and welcome. My name is Nektarios Liolios and I'm going to be talking to you about this. Who in the room comes from a bank? Show of hands. Who's a banker? Other financial institutions, technology players, startups, consultants. It's a really good mix. So we hope we're going to satisfy everybody, because what we're going to talk about now is really about the state of the industry and everybody who's involved. What qualifies me to talk about this? I'm the co-founder and CEO of Startupbootcamp, FinTech and InsurTech. We actually run out two different verticals in the sector. I've been doing this for the last 2.5 years. Before that, I spent 9 years of my life with Swift. People know Swift in the room? Swift, the payments network, transactions, cross-border payments, securities, etc. 3 years of that was something called InnoTribe. InnoTribe was Swift's initiative to bring innovation to the financial industry. This is where we were having a FinTech competition for startups before the word FinTech existed. So I've been around for a while, and always in this space between the industry and the entrepreneurs. Always talking to financial institutions who try to understand what's happening in the world, and startups who are doing something exciting and finding it really difficult to penetrate the big wall between the two. I started Startupbootcamp FinTech because I really saw the value of working really, really closely with the entrepreneurs and giving them access to the industry. So Startupbootcamp is an accelerator. It's a program, it's a network of accelerator programs around the world. We run different verticals, different industries. We focus ourselves on FinTech and insurance. And an accelerator does one thing. It takes the raw material, early stage startups, and put them through a really complex machinery of mentoring, advice, challenges, guidance. And at the end, you get businesses, you get companies that are looking to scale. You get organizations that have the vision to be one of the big players one day. We started Startupbootcamp FinTech in London. We then expanded to Singapore, and then we opened up New York. So within 18 months, we now have 3 programs running globally, because we believe those are the 3 big hubs globally where FinTech happens. We'll revisit this slide later on, because I think there's also a lot more happening around the world, and I'll share with you how we're looking to address that. The key thing about our program is that it is funded by industry players. So every program in London, in Singapore, in New York has institutions who actually put money to run the program. We execute this, but these organizations use us because they want to understand startups and they want to work with startups. On the other side, the startups that come to us, the value proposition for them is, hey, you've built something interesting, you might be looking for a partner, a distributor, a collaborator, and we work with organizations that actually understand that. So we see ourselves as connectors between those two worlds. Let's start, first of all, with the premise that my friends at Finnovista gave, because they chose the title. Are the startups really at the gate? Do the banks really feel threatened by startups? If you go on Google and just Google FinTech landscape, all these beautiful images, there's tons of them, hundreds and hundreds of them, that show you, oh, the landscape in lending, the landscape in this country, in that country. But if you look at them more closely, you realize that they're actually quite similar. Because everybody keeps talking about disruption, everybody keeps talking about fundamental shifts in the landscape, and if you look at the banks, if you look at the financial institutions and what they're doing now, how much do they actually engage with FinTech? What do they actually do? When we have a startup come to us, and we had a session yesterday with some amazing teams, the first question we ask them is, what is the problem that you're solving? Because for you to succeed as an entrepreneur, you must be solving a real problem. Now, if you zoom into one of these images, and you look at what the startups are addressing, and this is a very generic FinTech slide, you'll see that a lot of the problems that the startups are solving, be it lending, be it payments, to some extent investments, they're not really things that the banks care that much about, right? The reason peer-to-peer lending exists is because the banks were not giving loans to certain people. The reason people make cheaper cross-border transactions is because the banks were charging too much. And guess what? If a bank would lose some of the Forex business, are they really going to hurt? Are they really going to bleed? What's interesting is that you might not get somebody come in and chopping your head off. But a little cut here, and a little cut there, and a little cut there where you weren't expecting it, and someday you'll wake up and you realize that you're dying. And this sounds dramatic, because it is. So when we talk about the startups are at the gate, we need to talk about not one big organization that's come in to take all the business away from a bank, but we're talking about lots of little things that are happening at various stages of maturity that can jointly start really pose a threat. The banks have recognized that this is happening, and they're desperately trying to make sense of this. And this is what I'm going to focus on in this presentation, because ultimately it's about trying to understand how does a big industry that is very old as an industry, very slow-moving, very kind of burdened by legacy systems and regulation and inertia, how does the industry respond to this? What do the banks do, and what should they be doing? Now, I said that we're going to talk about assumptions. When people think startups, they usually think about a guy in sneakers, and usually that type of sneakers, who is probably in the early 20s, jeans, t-shirt, sits somewhere in a dark garage with his mate and builds something cool, right? Sort of very early Steve Jobs or Hewlett and Packard or whatever. But that's not what we see in FinTech. What we see in FinTech is a very different type of startup. 38 is the average age of a FinTech entrepreneur in our programs that we run globally. Okay, these are all people who have been in the industry, who have seen something that doesn't work, and have decided to do something about it. These are people that are not building the next mobile wallet or the next bill-sharing app. These are people that build solutions for genuine problems. And this is where the threat starts to become a little bit more real. People also assume that when startups come to something like an accelerator, when they're at a very early stage of their journey, they're looking for funding, okay? They want to raise their first round of money because that will allow them to grow and scale, et cetera, et cetera. And what we've seen in our programs is that the majority of entrepreneurs see funding as a side effect. Especially when they're a little bit older, they might have got together with some of their friends, they all have some money on the side, they might have remortgaged their house, whatever it is, but it's not funding that drives them. What drives them is access to the industry. They come to an accelerator because they recognize that despite all this talk about disruption, what they need is to work with the banks, with the other financial institutions, and use them for a variety of different things. This is a snapshot of the last cohort of Startupbootcamp FinTech London. So they graduated 2 months ago. Now, I'm always looking at the back because for some reason I think there's a screen. What you'll see when you start looking up the names, that none of the startups here actually operate in this space that we usually associate with FinTech. Because again, another assumption, FinTech is all about payments, maybe lending, maybe a little bit of investment. Now, this is a FinTech program at the end of 2015. It's already quite mature in terms of the ecosystem and the landscape in Europe. 5 out of the 9 teams you see on that screen are actually in the wider context of wealth and asset management. They say that investment advice that comes from the big firms like Goldman Sachs, etc., is not good enough. So what they've built is a platform where they crowdsource independent analysts and use that advice, and they've got data points to prove that their advice is better. If you take like something like Bonded out of Israel, what they built is a tool that allows you to put in your fixed income portfolio in minutes, and it's something that normally takes weeks and days to construct. Very, very different propositions from what people normally associate with FinTech. And the reason I'm spending time on this is not to promote our teams. Of course, we like them, we love them. But it's all about the industry is evolving, so the threat is becoming more real in areas where the banks and the other institutions have just neglected their customers, where they're offering services and solutions that are built on very kind of archaic systems. And because there wasn't a real threat, nobody really bothered. If it works, it makes money. Yeah, there might be some risk, there might be some cost, but we've got some money aside. If it mess it up, we'll just pay for it. And that attitude is still very much prevalent. And then, of course, there's blockchain. Who in the room has not heard of blockchain? Okay, the ones who probably haven't are too shy to raise their hand. Okay, just a level, blockchain technology that underlines Bitcoin. But nobody talks about blockchain anymore because of Bitcoin. Blockchain has become the buzzword. It's become the thing that everybody has an opinion about. It's in the press because it has the potential to actually genuinely transform things. And I'm keeping the word things quite generically. What do I mean by that? First of all, this is how the banks at the moment react to blockchain, right? Running around, trying to understand, oh, what God is this? I want it. I don't know what it is, but I need to have it. And what would you use it for? Well, we don't know. We don't even know if the technology works. We don't know if we can interface with it. But everybody has it. Everybody talks about it. Some of the banks were a little bit more visionary. They started looking at this a while ago. And little by little, we see that the institutions actually started now experimenting with it in a way that is meaningful. Is it transformational? We'd like to believe so. These are 3 of the startups that we had, 2 in Singapore and 1 in London, that have blockchain-based solutions. So what do they do? Again, just to give you an idea of where things become real. Autonomous is a share registry on blockchain. Okay? So taking something that heavily relies on record keeping and putting it onto an infrastructure that is made for this. Okay? Bearing in mind that blockchain, also known as distributed ledger, is an amazing way of keeping records in a way that nobody can tamper with it. Nobody can actually interfere with it. It's traceable, it's real time. There are a lot of advantages. If you actually have ever spoken to a blockchain entrepreneur, they're all crazy. I mean, they're all crazy individuals. And you need to have an element of craziness to be able to actually do this. So very often we get people who come to us with an idea, roughly formed, trying to figure out, we think this could work there. And then we work with them to actually make it fit. So Tradle came to us and said, we know that KYC has to be on blockchain because it will take away so much of the current pain. And they thought they can do this cross-bank. So if I open an account with one bank and then I want to change my bank, then I don't have to go through the KYC process again if I want to move my account. And then they realized that from a regulatory perspective, this is not possible. So what they then said is, okay, but what if I open an account with a bank, I've got my current account, I've been through KYC, and now I want to have a mortgage with the same bank, I still have to go through the same process. So let's use my solution, let's use Tradle's solution to actually get rid of that. And right now they're piloting with 3 banks who understand the necessity for this experimentation and are working with them. So this is where blockchain can be relevant. But let's be real, right? So we get about 25% of all applications at any given program are now blockchain-based solutions. But we rarely pick more than 1 or 2 because it's still not good enough. It's still not quality. But it's growing, and it's exciting. The big thinkers of this world think that blockchain will actually have an impact, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's only starting. So people think in 2020 and beyond, we will see banks actually implementing solutions. But this morning, the European Central Bank said that SWIFT, my old employer, will lose the exclusivity to run Target 2, which is the real-time gross settlement system, and they're exploring working with blockchain companies to do that. That's quite a bold statement, bearing in mind that SWIFT's a cooperative. SWIFT was made to build, to actually provide an infrastructure for the banks. So things are changing and happening probably faster than we all expect. Now let's come to the last point, which is the big question. Are you ready? Are you ready for this big change? What does readiness mean? And I'd like to spend a bit of time talking about one of my biggest frustrations over the last 5 years, 6 years. And that's the big discrepancy between appetite and capability. What do I mean by that? One of my co-founders, Marcus Gnurk, who built our program in Singapore, wrote a blog post just before Christmas that he called "Welcome to the FinTech Zoo." And in this blog post, he jokingly describes how the banks look at startups. And it's a little bit like you go to the zoo. You go, you see something exotic, it looks interesting, it's intriguing, it's exciting, and you want to take it home. But at home, you have no way of keeping it, you don't know what to feed it, it might be aggressive. And it's a little bit like what we see with the banks. Every bank now has a startup program. They want to see startups, they want to get inspired by startups. But what do you do beyond the appetite? What do you do beyond consuming information and education? And how do you actually prepare yourselves to act? Because startups are strange animals. They don't operate the same way. The whole point that the entrepreneurs can build all the exciting stuff is because they move faster, they're not burdened by politics, by legacy. They can change the direction of their business overnight. We are very much a startup. I spent 20 years, nearly 20 years of my life in the financial industry. And when I started with Startupbootcamp, I would be walking home every night thinking, oh my God, every day I'm making decisions that impact the course of my business. That's what the entrepreneurs are good at, and that's why we need to engage with them. But the banks don't understand it necessarily. Sometimes we have visitors who see a great team and they go, oh, we'd love to talk to them. I will schedule an appointment in 3 months. Or even if it's 3 weeks. 3 weeks in a startup's life is a lifetime. A lot of these organizations do not have the runway beyond 6 months. They don't have money that lasts them beyond 6 months to survive. So if you say that we love you, we'd love to work with you, we'll put you into our approved vendor process, and maybe procurement will allow you to formally engage with us in 12 months, that's not going to work. So what does capability mean? Capability means being aware that in order to engage with this new technology, in order to engage with entrepreneurs, and in order to actually have a meaningful relationship with a startup, you need to change a few things. You need to change your procurement process. You need to find a different way of letting a startup and your technology interact. What about failure? A bank cannot fail. A bank is built not to fail. It's all about trust. But it's about failure. It's about experimenting, and if it doesn't work, you know it didn't work, you let it go, you keep going. So having a sandbox environment, an experimentation environment that allows you to safely play around with technology. How many banks have got that? The other thing with capability is more of a mindset. Okay? Because every bank, and no exaggeration, every bank we've spoken to about participating in the program, the first conversation started with, yeah, but we'd like to be exclusive. If we see great technology, we want to be the first ones to use it. It doesn't work like that. Part of the whole innovation mindset is an awareness of collaboration. Okay, and a collaboration in so many different ways. Startups don't want to be bought by a bank. Entrepreneurs building a business because they want to grow their business. They want to have as many banks as possible as their customers. They white label the solution. They give you the opportunity to take it and do great business with it on what you are good at. So that collaboration spirit is all part of the capability. It's really important to recognize that. It's really important that there's a bridge that needs to be gapped between the two sides. One of the things we have seen increasingly, especially with the ones that have started doing this way, way earlier, is an increased awareness of co-creation even. So you, Mr. Startup, you build something great, what you do fits 70% of what I need. Let's find a way together how we can bridge those 30%. And maybe we build a deeper relationship, but that's what the entrepreneurs want. So taking it even one step further in lab environments, at the moment we know of 5 collaborative labs that are going to be announced in the next 6 months. And these are organizations that are working with later stage entrepreneurs that are really trying to collaboratively make it work. And that could be blockchain, but it doesn't have to be. But it's all about an element of research and development, Going back to experimentation. My biggest frustration, though, is that a lot of organizations still see innovation as a box-ticking exercise. How does a bank benefit from having a fund if they don't work on anything else? I was once asked by a journalist, it's a very typical question. It's like, oh, what does this bank do and what does that bank do in terms of innovation? And I just got tired of it and said, why don't we just turn this around and why don't you just go and have a look at the top 100 banks in the world and look at the ones that you'd never heard of in the context of innovation. The ones where we really have no idea if they're doing anything. And anything could be so many different things. The ones we like and respect, and the ones who really have spent more time preparing for the potential threat, in inverted commas, are the ones who say, you know what, look at our approach to innovation very much like a startup would. We experiment. If it doesn't fail, if it doesn't work, we drop it for a moment, we revisit it. Interesting to see what BBVA did last week. They had their own BBVA Ventures. They dropped the venture fund as it was, and it has re-emerged in a different format. Playing around with the concept, experimentation, because otherwise you're missing the boat. So, what's in store? What's going to happen next? From our perspective, one of the things we're really keen on, and this is our recognition that we were wrong at the beginning, is that innovation, startup innovation, technology no longer comes only from the established economies. The big success stories, excuse me, have come from the West, have come from the US, from England, from Europe. But more and more we see amazing propositions built by entrepreneurs in developing economies. As a result of that, we decided to extend our network and go beyond London, Singapore, and New York. That's why we're working on Startupbootcamp FinTech Latin America, which will hopefully launch in the next couple of months out of Mexico. That's why we're working on Mumbai for India, and we also do something in Africa. And it's really important because it goes back to what is your problem? Are you solving a problem? Okay, the bottom of the pyramid is a problem. The fact that a large number of the population, we're talking about a very large number of the population, 2 billion out of the 7 billion people in the world have no access to financial services. And financial services is not just payments, is not just having an account. It could be things like insurance. It could be things like investing or saving. All these things are still big problems that need solving, and they can only be solved by the people in the market who experiences these problems. The other thing we see in Asia is it's a very different mindset when it comes to approaching innovation. Banking executives usually have long discussions about who's the big threat. Is it going to be Google or Facebook or Amazon? And nobody ever looks east and sees that Alibaba is already doing all of that. Alibaba has a payments proposition. Alibaba has a lending proposition. And all these propositions come through collaboration. They don't buy the solution, they partner with the entrepreneurs. So we think that the globalization will have a big impact. And a lot of the stuff that we expect to see will come from emerging economies. And this is really all I wanted to share today. A quick snapshot, an insight into what we've seen over the last few years. A shared frustration about the inability, to some extent, but also the unwillingness, to another extent, of the industry to actually face up and go, what's going on, guys? Is this really going to be the next Kodak? The next Nokia? People laugh because banks are so comfortable within regulation. Regulation is not there to protect the banks, but it's been used for that. And I know this is a polemic statement, I'm happy to discuss that. But reality is that if we look ahead 10, 20 years from now, we will miss some of the names that we see now, but we'll also still have some of the others who recognize that the world is changing and we have to change with them. So thank you for your time, and I think I've got 2 minutes for questions.